Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for thanks for doing this. Oh, we already had. See, I already screwed up one thing, and that's a good. I put up the newsletter link and did it badly. I did it just to the panelists. This is why I need Scott so badly. Like it's just vital that I have an assistant uh, who's really in charge. Anyway, okay, so there. If you would like to subscribe to Mason's newsletter, that's where it is. Mason, before we get into anything about habits and routines, I want to ask you three hard-hitting questions. Are you ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. First of all, rain or snow?
Snow.
All right. Slovakia or Slovenia?
Oh, man. I haven't been to either place. Let's say Slovenia.
A good choice, I think. I've been to Slovenia. I've not been to Slovakia, but I've been to the Czech Republic, and I really liked Slovenia. It's like idyllic with little mountaintop villages. Loved it. Okay. Bacon or sausage?
Bacon.
Okay, I think that's a good choice. I feel like bacon, you're a lot less likely to like die from food poisoning.
Just like a good crispy bacon seems a higher plane than like a good sausage. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like the peak you can reach is a little bit higher.
Yeah, like that's the possibilities are much higher.
Yeah.
With bacon. So we're going to talk about habits and routines and rituals, as you call them in your book, Daily Rituals. And I wondered about that title. How did you land on rituals as opposed to something like habits or routines?
I mean, it's kind of a funny story. The whole project started as a blog that I launched as kind of a hobby, and just kept up for fun. Like when I would run across a description of someone's routine, a writer or an artist, I would just post it on the blog. And, I think I had like 12 readers, but then after a year and a half, the blog kind of got some notice and started to get a lot of visitors. And that finally led to the book project. But the title of the blog was Daily Routines, and the working title of the book was Daily Routines. And my focus in writing it was people's routines. I wanted to look at how they organize their typical day to get their creative work done and kind of, keep up their energy and optimism. And then at the last second, actually, when I saw the catalog copy from my publisher, they sent me like a mock-up of what was going to be in the catalog for that spring. They changed the title to Daily Rituals. And I was like, no, like rituals are such a different thing. Like, I mean, ritual has this very kind of religious or mystical connotation. And I was like, I wasn't thinking about rituals when I wrote it. And my editor was like, look, it's a better title. And she's like, they are rituals too. Like, she said, like, you did write about rituals, like, don't worry about it. And she said, believe me, Daily Routines is just too flat as a title, and Daily Rituals feels more elevated. And so yeah, I think she was right about that. As a title, it's better, but I've always felt like a little bit of a not a fraud, but like everyone's like the expert on rituals, and I'm like, yes, here I am, accidental expert.
I wonder if some of the palatability of it does come from the fact that because of social media, we have also kind of normalized things like ritual and some of these words that maybe when you and I were growing up seemed a little like to be infused with a little bit more religiosity, and now they just seem like this is just how people talk. It also could be because we both live in LA.
That could be. Yeah, I hear a lot about self-care rituals. I feel like that's a normal part of the everyday discourse, at least here. I don't know if that's true everywhere else. So yeah, maybe it's not so esoteric anymore or so special.
Yeah.
The meaning's not so particular.
Well, but I think if you had talked to me when I was maybe in my 20s or 30s, I might have recoiled at the term ritual, but I think there's a lot of value in it. And as I was thinking, I have my copy right here. As I was looking at it and just kind of thinking about it, I was understanding that, in my head, there is value in thinking of the time that you spend on creation as sacred, right? That there is some value. And as as one thumbs through this book and your other book, I think you start to see that a lot of these people did see it as something that was fairly sacred, right? Like it became more than just a means to an end, I think.
Yeah. I've come to sort of think of rituals as being about transformation. Like a lot of these creative people are trying to get into a state of mind or a headspace where they can do this, kind of demanding, ambitious work, but also this kind of slippery, fragile work. And it's so easy to be interrupted and be derailed, and you have to kind of like create these conditions to do it. So I think the rituals are a way to sort of like walk yourself step by step into that state of mind where you can do this kind of work. And I think it almost doesn't matter what they are. It just matters that you believe they work and that you repeat them. The repetition itself is the magical thing. It's like it kind of trains your mind to know, okay, now we're going into this kind of work mode. And so yeah, I do think rituals are actually, I was also resistant to the whole terminology, but I do think they're kind of a useful lens for looking at this kind of work.
Yeah, you mentioned like that it doesn't really matter what the ritual is as long as you believe it works. I think a lot about how silly it seemed when I was a kid when baseball players will not step on the first base line on their way to the mound or the third base line. And how like you're just as a kid, I think you're like, that's so stupid. What's the point of that? But it becomes that the superstition is about just the act, right? That's putting yourself into that headspace. I wonder, you talk about like the process of publication when you set out to, well, you didn't, I mean, let me correct myself. You didn't necessarily set out to write a book, but as you were getting into this book publishing process, did you have an inkling that it would be successful, fall flat? What was your expectation going into that? Because I will say that, and we were talking about this offline, my therapist of all people has your book sitting on her coffee table. Like I saw that was one of the first things that I saw when I went in there. And your book has really resonated with a ton of people. Did you see that coming at all? Was that a surprise? How did that go for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a surprise. I think, like a lot of writers, I sort of went back and forth between feeling like this is the greatest thing ever, everyone's gonna love it, and like, oh my God, what am I doing? This is terrible. And I think I just didn't know. I knew I found these stories interesting. I didn't know how much of an appetite there was for them. I mean, it is a repetitive book, like by design. It's like you get to the first person and they got up at this time and they drank their coffee and they took a shower and it's like, and then the next person, it's like the same story. And I tried to bring in the kind of evocative or colorful or funny details that would make each one feel, lively and unique. But there were times when I thought, oh my God, like who's going to pick up this book that's just like a description of someone's day over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other funny thing was, so when I started the blog, I was working as an assistant editor at a small architecture magazine in New York. I was trying to get into the publishing business. That was kind of my like little toehold. And then when I got the book deal, it was right when the Great Recession happened. And, I didn't get enough money because I was a new unknown author to like quit my job and just write the book full time. So I had to do the full-time job and do the book, which is a challenge. But on top of that, like they were laying people off left and right at this magazine. And I actually told my immediate supervisor, who I was friends with, like, hey, good news, I got this book deal. And he was like, don't tell anyone, because if they know you have this project, you're going to be the next person laid off, guaranteed. So I wrote it like in secret. I mean, I had like, I would get up early and work on this thing, and I wasn't telling my colleagues. And, I told my friends, but it always felt like this kind of secret. And then it was so weird to finally see it like on bookshelves. I mean, it's like this thing that I had as Word files on my laptop, and then all of a sudden it's out there. So I feel like in some way I kind of still haven't gotten like over that. Like it's like somebody like me wrote this book, I guess, but it sort of feels like an alternate reality,
I could especially see that because it is a little bit like, even the way that it's designed, it is almost like a reference book. And so I think when, like when we write a very personal book, you're like, well, yeah, of course that book is my book and I can imagine everything. But because of the nature of your book, I could see how it would be a little bit disorienting, because it's a little like if you wrote the encyclopedia, you'd be like, well, that's not really is that me? What is happening?
Yeah, yeah. And plus, like I like to write like early in the morning, first thing. And so
Hmm.
I get up early and I do my thing, and then I go eat breakfast and take a shower and go to my day job. And so it's like it is kind of like an alternate version of myself that did this, you know? Like
Hmm.
so anyway, but it's been really a pleasure to see that people, you know, get it and like it. And it's been interesting to see the different kinds of people. Like there's been a real people who are into like life hacking and like
Hmm.
you know, really ultra maximizing their productivity and like their diet and their workout routines. I don't know. I never imagined that they would want to read about like Frederick Chopin's creative process or
Right,
whatever.
right. I was thumbing through it, and I was also reading about the book on in an NPR interview you did a long time ago, and there's this mention of John Updike's routine where he talks a lot about how the reason he writes every day is because it's such joy to not write, that it's so wonderful to not do it. And I wonder how that how this process of writing this book has affected your own process or your own set of rituals. Do you feel like it helped, or does it make you feel guilty sometimes because you're like, I'm the guy who wrote the book on this and yet I'm still struggling with this thing?
I think I did feel that way when it first came out. Like everyone's like, "Here comes expert on you know, productivity, Mason Curry," and I'm like, "Oh man, I am so not the expert on productivity." But
Hmm.
I mean, I really wrote the book in the spirit of like, you know, I've wanted to be a writer since like college, and I've always had trouble with it. Like I procrastinate, I feel blocked. Like my original plan was to write fiction, and that went nowhere. And then I switched to magazine writing, and that like also, I mean, it went a little bit farther, but it's just never been easy. And so I really like came to this project from the spirit of like, how does anybody do this? You know, like at a really basic level, like how many hours a day do they do their creative work, and how do they do it if they have a day job or if they have other commitments? And how do they do it when they feel like they don't have any willpower or any energy or, you know, all that stuff. So I don't really feel so much like the expert as like a fellow sufferer. You know,
Yeah.
like I gathered these as data, you know, as like if you're having trouble, here's like between the two books, 300 examples of how these famous successful people actually did it on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
Hopefully some of it will be useful or give you ideas or at least be comforting if you can see that these people had some of the same struggles that, you know, I think a lot of us do.
So it's almost like you're a liaison, less of a top down and more of a middleman of like, hey, here's if you need help, these guys might be able to help you a little bit.
Yeah,
It reminds me, there's a book by we spoke to at Writer's Block, this woman Lori Gottlieb, who wrote a book called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, which
I
is
read that.
about
Yeah.
her doing therapy, but also her going to therapy, which I think is very truthful about like, look, I have my own struggles. I'm helping people, but I also need help myself. And I think there's a lot of value in that honesty.
Yeah, I read that book. That was terrific. I'd like to hear her speak. I think you're right. No, I mean everybody wants. I mean, it's sort of the author's job to like put themselves out there and embody like what are universal experiences or worries. I sort of sidestepped that a bit because the book is so impersonal. But I feel like the way I curated it was, you know, I mean, there's so much material, and I got to pick like which quote goes in or which details go in, and I feel like it really is sort of a secret roadmap to my particular like frustrations and obsessions. You know, like so much of it's like it's almost like a book of all the things where when I'm reading, I go like, oh my God, you know, that quote, or I underline it like 5 times. Like I just sort of like
Hmm.
it's the passages and the details that jumped out at me off the page. Like those are the ones that made the cut. So it's yeah, I don't know. That's kind of how I approached it.
As a kid, were you drawn to systems of organization, or were you the opposite or somewhere in between? I'm The reason I ask is I'm imagining there's a world where you were like a hellion, and then you needed to find organization in order to like find some kind of like peace in the world. And there might be a world where like this has always just been kind of something that percolates in your brain. Is there one or the other that rings true, or is it somewhere in between?
I definitely was not a hellion. I was, you know, kind of the bookish, like homebody type. I think around adolescence there was a moment where routines became important to me because like my parents divorced, my dad moved out of state, and my grandmother moved in with my mom and my brother and I, and like and my brother and I had to just go from having our own rooms to sharing a room right when I was like 14, 15, which is a
Hmm.
terrible age to have to go to sharing a room with your little brother. And I think around that time it was like I needed a routine to like separate out a little space for myself. Like it was kind of like after school, I could like go in the bedroom and listen to music, and my brother wasn't allowed in. And like that's when I started getting up early in the morning, because I felt like if I got up before everybody else, I could knock out my homework really fast. I could have some time to myself. And I just sort of intuitively realized that like your routine was a way to carve out some space for yourself when there wasn't much of that.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's kind of where I first got interested.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about the importance of a sacred space in big cities.
Mm.
I come from a small place in Kansas, and I've noticed that one of the few times in Los Angeles that I can feel like I have my own time is in the early morning. And I wonder if that might be part of the reason that this book resonates, I would guess, with people in on the coasts and in big cities, is this sense that we're just like inundated with stimuli. So how do we carve out some time? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting idea. I think there might be some truth to that. Like, I can't even imagine living someplace where you have the physical space you need and there aren't a million like demands on your attention. Um, yeah, but on the other hand, like I mean, people always ask like, what do you think about technology? You know, a lot of these figures lived hundreds of years ago and they didn't have to deal with email and social media. And I do feel like we all have so much constant, even if you're fairly disciplined, like the itch to check the phone and check your mentions and I even felt myself like my like attention span and my concentration ability, it's like I feel like it's gotten a little worse over the years. Like it's, I'll sit down to read, which is a big part of my work life, and it's so easy to feel like maybe I'll just check the phone really fast. And
Hmm.
so I think also maybe it appeals to people like regardless of location, just because having a carving out like like you said, a sacred space or a space where you really just do whatever your most important thing is and you don't do anything else is like both such a luxury and so hard to do.
Hmm. Yeah, it's such a paradox, right? And it can almost like become the snake eating itself, because we are talking about something that seems so small, in the same way that talking about meditation seems sort of masturbatory in a way, because you're like, well, what am I doing? Well, you're not really doing anything, but the goal is different than to be doing something. And so it is this job of like creating negative space, which is very different from like, I'm going to go build a chair, right? Like that's, I'm going to go construct something. So here we're talking about like opening up space, which is also a very different concept, I think, in our heads, and can so therefore seem kind of confusing. And I think that's the power of you writing about other people doing it. It's not so much just telling someone you got to do this, you got to do this. It's showing people that that's valuable. I was actually just this week researching for a book I'm working on, about, I was looking into like the amount of information that we're taking in. And this guy, Daniel Levitin, writes that between 1986 and 2011, so a 25-year span, the amount of information we consumed has gone up by 5 times. Right. So like think about 1986. It's not like we were bereft of information. It was already quite a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
And so it quintupled in that time. So I do think that it's like, it's not just that we sense that something is going on, or that we're soft, or that we can't do it. It really is this like deluge of information. I wonder, I mean, this maybe is an obvious question, so forgive me if it is, but I wonder what impact the last year has had on your own ability to stick to your guns, because it has, changed things for a lot of people, and I'm sure it has changed things for you.
Yeah, it's been it's like in one way my lifestyle has continued more or less the way it always has. I always worked from home, and I spend a lot of time like reading inside my apartment. So, perfect. I'm
Hmm.
like ready to go. But this, I mean, it was challenging. I mean, both because it was just like mentally destabilizing. My wife, who normally works outside of the house, had to work inside our apartment for a lot of the year. And that, all of a sudden it was hard for us both to carve out the space to do our work and do our Zoom calls. So that was a challenge. And then, I don't know, I think I didn't realize before how much, like we're pretty self-sufficient homebodies who work remotely. But man, like going out for a drink or going out for a bite to eat or going to a movie, like what a huge difference just a few of those things a week can make, like, and being in LA, we've been able to continue socializing somewhat outside. But just not having other spaces to go to, it's like you're always in that one space, and it makes it harder, I think, to make that, the sacred space, like, because it's so polluted by dishes and your relationship and your barking dog and the loud neighbors and the news. It's like, how do you protect like a bubble for this other kind of work? I don't know, I think if you can step away, you can come back to it a bit more fresh. So I'm really looking forward to just like sitting in a cafe or sitting in a bar and like just reading a magazine, like that, I mean, just going to the bar, reading a magazine, drinking a beer and coming back. It's amazing what that can do,
Yeah. If you were going to advise someone who, let's say they've decided like, oh, it's been too long since I've been creative, or it's been too long since I cared about my job, so I want to start this business, or I want to commit to some new kind of habit, and you were like, okay, day one, here's the things that you need to think about when you're setting that up, what would you tell them?
I mean, I'd really take a hard look at like, I mean, you have to know yourself a bit. Like when do you do your best work? When do you do the type of work you want to do? Like, I think everyone really does have their own internal clock, their own, I think they call it chronotype. Like the idea of morning people and night people, like that's a real thing. It's not just like night people are lazy and can't get up early. So like really look at like, when have you been successful at this kind of work before? And then like do whatever you can to carve out some time at that time, like every day. I really think it's the repetition from day to day, carrying that thread through, that is the most important thing, even if it's only like a half an hour or an hour. I mean, an hour can be plenty. A half an hour can be plenty. If you know that half an hour is going to be there for you the next day and the next day and the next day. I think those two things are really the foundation, and then, I mean, in terms of the project too, it's like, I think starting small, like don't let the immensity of the task throw you off. Like just start somewhere, even if it's like, if you want to write something and you can just write a sentence a day, something like that, where you can do it. Like, I feel like we've all had that experience where once you break that inertia, you might write like 5 pages, or, like it builds up over time. But then doing whatever you can to not let that space be interrupted, not let that bubble be broken, not let that time be in, like get screwed up on your calendar. Like really have that time day to day to day to day, and really don't do anything else.
What about, so one thing I've noticed from working with people on, in kind of the same vein that you're talking about, is that much of the time they might be okay for the first week or the first 2 weeks, but then something happens, right? So like there will be something else that goes on in your life that maybe was outside of your control, or maybe you had a big night of drinking and you're hungover and you just had a bad day. And I feel like the same patterns that kept someone from doing something then come back to haunt them. And they're like, well, yeah, I'm a piece of shit. And, I skipped a day. And so now I'm probably going to skip the next year. Have you noticed ways for people to build in kind of like circuit breakers so that they can avoid that pitfall?
It's so tough. I mean, I feel like you're describing me and exercising. Like I get really good. I don't even. I sometimes I get too ambitious, but sometimes I start really with a reasonable amount. I do it every day or every third day or whatever.
Really,
And
this
then
is an
something
intervention.
happens.
Actually,
Yeah.
we wanted to come around to this.
Yeah. I know I get sick or I have a whatever, and then it's gone for like 6 months. So like I said before, I'm not necessarily an expert. I would say, you got to let yourself off the hook. Like I think perfectionism is a real occupational hazard for doing, especially like creative work. Like just because you had one bad day or you had one off day doesn't mean the project's blown. Like you just have to like get back to it. And even if getting back to it takes a few days, like that's okay. And
Mhm.
then I sometimes think about, there's like a famous Ray Bradbury quote where he said when he would go to write, I'm paraphrasing, there were two rules. One is that you don't have to write, and two, you can't do anything else. So he would go on, he was like, he was at his desk, he had all his writing supplies, he didn't have
Mhm.
to write, but he couldn't do anything else. I mean, that's why it's so hard to have like a smartphone or internet access. But
Yeah.
like I think we've all had that experience. Like you'll start writing if it's between that and just like staring at the wall. So
Mhm.
I think that's part of, I kind of feel like a good routine is almost like taking stock of your own worst impulses, your own worst habits, and then
Mhm.
designing something that's going to short circuit them or block them. So if you know you're gonna look at your phone, then like put the phone in a drawer or one of those lock boxes with a timer on it. Like get creative. Like I feel like people, writers are supposed to be creative people, and yet
Mhm.
we all feel like, oh, but it's impossible for me to get like half an hour a day. It's like, it's possible to get a half an hour a day. And I feel like you got to just like treat it like a problem you're trying to solve in a creative way. And yeah, I guess that's my.
I actually, one of my frustrations with all of this comes from my sports background, where in basketball, you are trained to figure out ways into a state of flow, or to, well, in sports, they often call it being in the zone, right? And in the zone, usually what we think of is like, oh, that guy can't miss. Like he's in the zone. But in the zone also just means your body is so hyper connected that you've lost track of time, and you're not really thinking in a cognitive way about what's going on. And one of my frustrations, having been through that and now having switched to a lot more cognitive tasks, is that nobody ever trained us when we were kids to do this, right? Like nobody ever
Mhm.
talked in school about like, okay, so I know that the prospect of doing these 40 math problems is really not attractive. So we're going to talk not about the math problems, but how do you set up a system so that you can attack those? Because I remember as a kid just coming home with homework and being like, I don't know how this is going to get done. Like I hate it.
Yeah.
And somehow I'm just going to slog through it. So I do think there's some value in forgiving ourselves, right? And then, like you said, knowing thyself to figure out like, well, what idiosyncrasies do I have? What do I hate? And then how can I work around that? Um, how would you like? Let's say I think I know that you're married. I don't think you have children, but
Right.
if you did have children, how would you talk to them about these kinds of things, these jobs of like solving problems? Because I think we all have to kind of think of ourselves like kids in this task because we just don't have a lot of training in it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading something in a kind of self-helpy book about a learning mindset. Like so many of us have like I tried to do this thing and I was bad at it, so like I suck at this,
Mm-hmm.
and like if you could just shift it to like I it means I need to get better at it, like all right, it means I haven't had any practice at it. Like just that little tweak, like I think can make such a huge difference. Like I think a lot of kids, like this happened to me, it's like you're bad at math and it's like, oh yeah, like I was bad, parents says I was bad at math too. Everyone in our family is just bad at math. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like, like you can't be like, how can you decide you're bad at math already? As like an elementary schooler, like it's just a matter of like you haven't had the chance to get good at it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think if you treat more problems that way, like, oh, this is just something I haven't practiced, instead of like I just suck at this, um, they might seem a little bit less daunting and more just like stuff to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that like it is like I would say I'm a terrible singer. Now,
Okay.
like, is that really true, or is that a way for me to deflect responsibility, like you said, about potentially getting better at singing? Now, again, if I'm totally honest, I don't care that much about singing, but I think there's something that's in us that finds it fun to be the kid at the back of the class who's like, "Ugh, I'm not good at this. I'm bored with
Oh yeah.
this, whatever." So I also think that, I see that in myself, when people are doing karaoke and I'm like, well, I'm just an awful singer. I don't want to participate in this. And it's really just a way to deflect from another fear that I might have. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that there's also the possibility that, like, especially in an internet culture where it's always cool to be the least committed you know, like
Uh-huh.
it's always best to be the most like detached. It is hard to open up and say like, I want to learn this thing, to approach it with a kind of childlike attitude.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I, it is really tempting to like define yourself by your like, oh, yeah, I mean, I was like that. It was like, oh, I'm not good at geometry. Like, I'm into
Hmm.
music, man. Like, I don't care about numbers. Like, um, I don't know. Why does it have to be such an like? It's weird. Maybe it's just the thing about growing up. How like, why does that have to be part of your identity, whether you're good at that or not? You know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it is.
I
Yeah,
think that's
it's
part of yeah. Maybe that's the lesson to teach kids is like it doesn't define who you are. It's just a thing that you can get better at if you try.
mhm.
And like we'd like you to try. Like it doesn't mean you have to be like a math kid, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I do think that finding universality is useful, like being able to say like, well, I did learn this other thing that I didn't think I was going to be able to do, and so therefore if I apply a similar methodology, I would probably be able to figure out this other thing. I think that, like you said, we tend to think, especially with things like math, that there's some magic to it, when in reality it's the same as everything else. Like you just have to figure out how it works for your brain. um so I think
Yeah, I
that
mean,
is.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, it makes me think of sports. Like like I was when I was a youth, I thought that it was cool to like play in a rock band, and like sports weren't cool. And it's like, I thought it's like what a dumb attitude. Now I read
Hmm.
about people like who are whatever great artists and writers, and they were like college or high school football stars or whatever. And you're like, I kind of felt like, no, you can't be like the high school quarterback and then be like an artist. That doesn't those things mismatch. But it's like, why? Like, who said that? It's like
Hmm.
it's just like our like we just want to put everything in little columns. And I mean, certainly if you want to be like a creative person, like you should get in the habit of not letting yourself get put in those columns. So I definitely failed that test a few times.
Yeah, yeah. We I got to talk to this professional wrestler recently named John Moxley. He's a super tough dude. And it was fun listening to him talk about what he loves about being in the ring, in that it's a combination of like near death experience, because even though we all know nobody's like under the illusion that people are really wrestling yet, it's still really dangerous because there are people were flying around and there's turnbuckles and all this other stuff. And then there's also the element of like almost musical theater of this choreographed event that then leads to a kind of rock star mentality of like being in front of a crowd. And so there you
Mhm.
have this like combination in one, again, really tough dude, of these things that we might have said, like you said, oh well, you can't be an athlete and a performer, but it's really all the same thing, and he's achieving is the same thing, which is again that state of like losing time, or being in flow. And I wonder, I mean, I think you're right that like a lot of that is we have to identify with some group, some subgroup when we're in high school, and so therefore we
Yeah.
just pick one. And I wonder if like I hate to go with the old bugaboo of like the internet is the problem, but the internet does kind of like allow us to separate ourselves maybe a lot more than we need
Yeah,
to.
it does, but it also, I don't know, the kids seem so cool these days. Like, people have such interesting esoteric and varied tastes. I mean, young people, it seems to me. I
Hmm.
don't know. I mean, not that I know very many young people, but just based on the TikToks that people share on
Yeah.
Instagram, I don't know. I feel like the kids are all right. I'm more worried about adults.
Well, yeah, it could be that like introducing the internet to us was a problem because we had identified that this is the natural progression, that you have to build these little tribes. And now the little like younger people are like, what? That's a dumb way to live.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, it's the old people who got the internet when they were already partially formed who are now screwing everything up.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to
I'm gonna
answer.
I'm
Oh,
gonna
go ahead.
open my blinds because it's so dark in here all of a sudden. So I'll
Oh,
be
great.
right with
Well,
you.
this will be a good break because I'm gonna answer. We're gonna ask a question of Mason in a second, and if people have questions, we'd love to get in them. Um, Amanda, I'm not gonna have you come on camera because your question is fairly straightforward, and I don't think is gonna require a ton of follow up. But if other people have slightly more complicated questions than the one I'm about to ask, we'd love to get you on camera. Okay, Mason. Oh, he didn't like that look, and I and I appreciate that about him.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, a question comes to us from Amanda, who wonders, what books would you currently recommend? She did not define that it had to be in regard to like productivity or habits. So take it as you like. What are you reading?
Hmm. Um, I really like to read like writers and artists journals or diaries or letters. I feel like there's such a like direct expression of what I mean. It's just for me, it's so comforting. It's like you think these people are these like amazing brilliant minds we put on these pedestals, and then you read their journals and it's like, another day, got nothing done, 2 days in a row of horrible misery. It's like, you're like this. I mean, I thought I had it bad. And then you read like Virginia Woolf's diaries or George Eliot. I think Susan Sontag's journals are spectacularly good. They come in 2 or 3 editions. They're just like, there's so much like liveliness and energy, and it's like personal stuff. It's what she's reading. It's ideas. They're fun. I think those are great for anybody.
Yeah.
The Virginia Woolf journals or diaries are great. There's a good book of this like abstract expressionist painter from the 60s named Grace Hardigan. Her journals were published in the like maybe like 10 years ago, from the 50s, and like they're super good. It's like it's this young woman painter trying to like learn how to paint in like a loft in downtown New York. It's this boys club, and she's got a boyfriend who's kind of like draining her energy, and she's trying to get noticed, and she's trying to sell work, and she keeps having to get jobs to pay for painting supplies, and she's reading Virginia Woolf's diaries and reflecting on how much she can relate to them. It's great. That kind of stuff is like bread and butter. I feel like it's so inspiring and energizing, and it just makes me feel like, okay, like you're kind of part of this continuum of people like who on a day-to-day basis don't really know what they're doing necessarily,
Yeah.
but they keep like pecking away at it, and like now some of them we remember like what
Mhm.
it all added up to.
Does that inspire you to journal? Are you a journaler?
On and off, like it makes me wish that I did.
Mm.
I'm not a journaler. I feel like it's like sort of a competition between like the journaling and the other writing I have to do. It's like I can't seem
Hmm.
to do both, so I'd like to get back to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I could imagine that would, if you are reading, if one were reading the struggles of these other people and then started to sort of journal their own struggles, you'd realize like, oh shit, there's some real continuity here, or some similarity between these two.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get to a live question from Ken. We're gonna do a little mechanics here. So hold tight for 1 second while he potentially appears on the screen. Um, Welcome,
Hello.
Ken.
Hey, it's great to be here. Guys, really cool chat. It was very worth taking my lunch break in the middle of my day here in Sydney, Australia to join in. So thank you.
Yes. Perfect lunch break. What's on your mind, Ken?
I was curious to know, Mason, is there a ritual or routine or habit that you're struggling to maybe get into your daily practice right now? And if so, what are your plans to try and weave it into your daily practice?
Yeah, I would say like people often ask me like what's the one habit that you found in your research that like everybody should adopt, and it's definitely like the daily walk. You see so many figures from all time periods and all professions, creative professions, like building a walk into their day, often like a long walk by themselves, and that's like where they get their best ideas, and they carry a notebook to jot things down, and it's like just this essential part of their practice. And like I know that, and when I do take a walk, I feel better afterwards. I feel more energetic, and yet I just haven't lately been able to stick to it. So yeah, what's my plan for sticking to it? Maybe having this conversation will get me back in gear. I bought like a cheap Apple Watch because I thought maybe like tracking everything would help, and that worked for a while. I don't know. Do you have any ideas for how to stick with it?
No, how would you stick with it? I guess I kind of, my wife is into walking right now. So if I don't want to walk, but I know she's walking, I suggest it.
Yeah.
So that kind of it forces me then to do it, because she's like, oh, you want to go for a walk? Cool, let's do it. So
That's
it's kind
smart.
of, it's just kind of pushing, knowing that I have somebody there. So a lot of the stuff we do in the Discord and process stuff is finding someone to keep us accountable. So knowing that my wife is into the walking right now, that kind of gives me an excuse to get out and walk even when I don't feel like it.
Yeah, that's smart. Okay, I'll have to talk to my wife about that.
Ken, thank you for the question. We'll
Thanks,
see you.
guys. Thanks, Mason.
We'll see you again soon. Mason, that actually kind of fits with something you were talking about earlier with knowing yourself, right? So if Ken mentioned that he's more prone to do it if his wife does it with him, right? So like one thing I notice about myself is I'm a bit of a people pleaser. So if I can build in situations where I am people pleasing, but it's working towards something that benefits me, then that really works on my brain. So I talk a lot about like the power of like buddy system stuff. If I don't want to let somebody down, then I am more likely to do the thing, right? But if I've said like, I'm going to check in with you, castigate me in some way if I haven't done this, then I'm more likely to do it, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, one of my struggles is like the morning is the best time for me for like everything. Like you talked about journaling. If I want to do that, I need to do it in the morning. If I want to take a walk, I'm most successful if I do it in the morning. If I want to write, morning. It's like, so I'm kind of always like, it's this crowd of things that if I really want to get them done, I need to do it kind of first thing. And so I end up, if I'm trying to like get some writing or reading done, I end up jettisoning the other things. So I need to get better at like taking advantage of other parts of the day. It's sort of like I get up, I get things done, and then as the day goes on, I just sort of like fade and fade and fade.
Yeah.
And that's always been something I've struggled with. And I don't know, it's just like
we need
to improve.
We need to incorporate siesta, and I say that not facetiously. Like when I lived in Mediterranean countries, that there's like at least for me, I start dragging at like 1:30 or 2, and weirdly, like this time of day. So for anybody listening or not, it's 6:45 Pacific time. Like I start to kind of like come alive again, and I think that there is some value in that. And like you said, knowing that about yourself can be really useful. I don't think we've built it into our culture very well, so it's harder to do it. But just knowing that about yourself could be a step.
That's a good idea. Yeah, it's like I know that taking an afternoon nap helps me, and yet I still have some sort of puritanical guilt, like, oh my God, here I am sleeping during the middle of the day, like some sort of good for nothing.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing it's particularly difficult in Los Angeles, I think, because it's always like so sunny outside, and you're like, I'm just gonna go into my hobbit hole and sleep now?
I know, totally.
With me. This is not what my ancestors like toiled tilled the soil to do.
Yeah.
Mason, thanks so much for taking the time. I'm going to let you get out of here so that you can get ready to get up early and do all of the things tomorrow. Before we go, I will post again your subtle maneuvers newsletter. Is that a good way for people to kind of pay attention to? Oops, I just DM'd you. See, this is why we need Scott. My apologies. Is that a way for people to keep in touch? Is that a good way? Is that a bad way?
Yeah. Okay. No, it's a great way. Yeah. I started it like maybe like 2 weeks before the pandemic kind of settled in. And it was because I'm starting a new book project, not a daily rituals book project. And I kind of felt like, I hate to just like leave this behind, it's resonated with a lot of people, and I still run across stuff and I think, God, I wish I'd gotten that in the book, like stories of these days. And so I thought, well, like everybody's talking about these newsletter platforms and they're cool. Like you can send out a weekly newsletter and it's free. And so I'm just kind of like keeping the book going in a very loose way. It's sort of like what I've been reading or run across. And then I also I thought as a whim, like maybe I'll do an advice column and we'll see if anybody writes in. And people have been writing in a lot. Like I have more questions than I know what to do with. And that's been a fun challenge. Like I'm trying to look at the research I've done for the books and use that to give an answer. Like it's not just my opinion. I'm trying to have some like evidence or examples. So anyway, it's been a good challenge, and it's been a great way to just kind of feel like I'm part of a community of other creative people, like during this time when we're all stuck at home. So yeah, if people subscribe, I'll definitely be keeping in touch, and I love seeing comments and stuff. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks, brother. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Bye.
Bye, Mason.